And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rabbi Misha Klebner, and on behalf of myself and Rabbi Nicole Roberts, welcome to all to North Shore Temple Emmanuel's Jews for Social Action webinar on the Uluru Declaration from the Heart. Thank you for joining us to hear about this important topic. In the book of Exodus, it says that you shall not wrong nor oppress a stranger, for you are strangers in a strange land. How much the more so for so many of us as newer arrivals or more recent arrivals to ensure the process of truth telling and ensuring that there is a voice for those who were without a voice for far too long, which was helped achieved by this Uluru Declaration. I will now hand over to Julia Selby, chair of NSTE's Jews for Social Action, and we will begin with our event. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rabbi Misha. Welcome, everyone. I acknowledge the traditional owners of country where NSTE is located, the
Julia, you've covered your camera, Julia.
The Guringai Nation. Sorry, everybody. We walk with respect on the land that sustains the spirit of these peoples. We offer respect to the descendants of the first people who continue to live within the community. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and culture have made and still make to the nation we share, Australia. We walk together towards the future. Jews for Social Action is the social justice group of North Shore Temple Emmanuel, and we're delighted to be holding this event, which is our 13th annual event under the title The Aboriginal Experience. We usually hold it during the Guy Marrigal Festival, which is a local northern suburbs of Sydney festival, or NAIDOC week, but everything's been changed around like everything else this year, so we just decided we would do it today. This is also our event to celebrate 60 years since the founding of North Shore Temple Emmanuel. And our founders could never have dreamt that we would be holding an event without all the people in the same room, with our speaker in Darwin where it's 30 degrees, sounds lovely here in Sydney, with Mark Tedeschi who's going to be talking to him who's in Blackheath where it is snowing, and with people in Sydney, Melbourne, and maybe other places as well. This online format has certainly given us more people than we would normally have. There are about 200 people who registered because I think we are all very keen to hear about this really important topic. We would normally ask attendees for a gold coin or for a donation, which we would pass on to a charity. So this time we had on our link, we invited you to give a donation to Children's Ground, which is an Indigenous charity that works with children, families and Indigenous communities. And I know many of you have donated, and those that haven't, you're still welcome to do so at childrensground.org.au. It is now my honour to introduce you to our speaker, Thomas Mayer, and to Mark Tedeschi, who will be leading the conversation with Thomas. Please feel free to use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to send in any questions, which, time permitting, we'll have answered towards the end of our time together. Thomas Mayer is a Torres Strait Islander, now living on Larrakia land in Darwin. He is the National Indigenous Officer and NT Branch Deputy Secretary of the Maritime Union of Australia and is Assistant Secretary of the Northern Territory Trades and Labour Council. He is also author of Finding Our Heart, a story about the Uluru Statement for young Australians, and I certainly hope there are some young Australians with us today. Thomas was elected from the Darwin Dialogue in Constitutional Reform to participate in the Uluru Convention, helping put the Uluru Statement together, and he has become an advocate for that statement around Australia. And that is the centre of our discussion today, and as I said, Thomas has been very kind to join us from Darwin today, and you can see he's in lovely tropical surroundings. Thank you so much, Thomas. Mark Tedeschi is well known in New South Wales as a barrister and having been Crown Prosecutor and Senior Crown Prosecutor. He's also an award-winning photographer and an author, including of murder at Mile Creek, about the 1838 legal trial for the brutal murder of 20 Aboriginal men, women and children at Mile Creek in northern New South Wales. Many thanks, Mark, for joining us today, and I'll now hand over to you to talk with Thomas.
Thank you very much, Julia, and welcome to everyone. Thomas, could you tell us a little bit about yourself first, where you come from, what you're doing now, and what you were doing before the summit, before the convention in 2017?
Yeah, so thanks, Mark, and it's an honour to be interviewed with you here in front of all these great people. I pay my respects to the Larrakia people. I'm coming from Larrakia country, which is Darwin, and this is where I've always been as far as where I live goes. So I was born here. My father came here from the Torres Strait in 1969 to work at the Francis Creek mine, actually in the Northern Territory near a little place called Pine Creek, and fell in love with my mum there and settled in Darwin here. So this is where I've been all my life, though more recently I've been travelling a lot with the Uluru Statement, and that's all slowed down because of COVID. But I was a wharfie. That was my first job. I was a wharfie on the docks here for 16 years, and was a very quiet bloke. You know, never said much. People would say, "Do you ever say anything, Thomas?" That was at footy because I played rugby, and at the workplace. But after the 1998 Patrick's dispute, that no doubt you're aware of, Mark, a lot of the staunch older unionists, you know, those guys, a lot of them took redundancy and retired. And so I was a young bloke, 20 years old, and I felt an obligation to step up to protect the wages and conditions and all those things that those older wharfies had fought for, you know, and for generations before them. So that's how I found myself in leadership, and then became more involved in community activism.
Right. Now, you were one of the people who attended what's been known as the Constitutional Convention at Uluru in 2017. Most people think, when you mention the term Constitutional Convention, they think of the conventions that were held before our national constitution in 1901. So tell us what led to the convention being held in Uluru.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned, you know, that most people would think of that. I don't know how many people know a lot about it, really, our constitution and how it was formed. You know, I mean, it was alarming for me to learn more about it, you know, in advocating for constitutional change. You know, learning that, you know, in 1901, or the constitutional dialogues, we were spoken of as a dying race. And certainly after that, with the White Australia policy, you know, the system, you know, and the powers that be certainly tried to assist us in dying out, but we're still here. But you know, I learned just how important the Constitution is, you know, and I'm sure a lot of our people have, and in the process that led to Uluru, just, you know, that it's the rule book of the nation. And, you know, when you consider that under Section 44, politicians, you know, lost their, you know, were not able to represent their electorates anymore as politicians because they did not comply with the Constitution. It's a powerful thing, you know, and
they had dual nationality potentially. Yeah,
dual nationality. Yeah, so you know, it's a really important document, and you know, and that's what people were thinking in our constitutional dialogues. You know, we've had representative bodies before, and they've all been destroyed. So we want to protect it. Yeah.
So, how did you come to be one of the participants in the convention at Uluru in 2017?
Yeah, I was quite active in the community. You know, I was a union official. I was a branch secretary at the time, so the elected leader in the Northern Territory. And as a small branch, I was the only paid official. So it was a very busy job. negotiating for members, you know, their enterprise agreements, and advocating for, you know, various things around the that happens on the wharves and on the ships. I organised some of the rallies that, you know, in response to some really bad decisions that were made about our people, you know, like the massive funding cuts in 2015 by the Tony Abbott government, for example, and the way that youth were being treated in detention at Don Dale. And so I was asked to be a facilitator at the Constitutional Dialogue in Darwin because of the activism, because of my prominence. And it was run by locals, you know, a couple of co-chairs, a woman and a man co-chair, and 5 local facilitators. And I had to pull out because we had some union business. Sorry?
Were they all Indigenous people?
Yeah, all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And we applied a formula. So it was 60% traditional owners for cultural authority in our region. And so we did that hard work of getting the invites out there and applying this formula. That came through the expertise of Professor Megan Davis, you know, a public law expert. And that was hard work, you know, because our people are today, you know, we're arguably overly consulted, though actions are what's missing, you know. So we, you know, there's this disbelief that that such conventions can reach an outcome.
And how many participants were there at the convention?
There was 100 at each convention, and you know, and we were asked on the first day to suspend our disbelief that we can make change through such a process. It was an unprecedented process. We learned that there were 13 dialogues around the country, and that it would culminate at one final convention at Uluru. So it was something that we had great hope for, you know, an opportunity to build consensus. Yes. Yeah, so I was elected from the Uluru Dialogue and went to Uluru. Yeah. You there, mate? Can you hear me? You've got a bit of an issue with your...
Right.
Okay.
So I think most people around Australia would have heard of the Uluru Statement Art. Could you tell us what that is and what it represents?
Yeah, the artwork is, I can show you actually a picture in this book here. But the artwork is very significant. It's in the tradition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander statements and petitions, you know, like if you think of the Yirrkala Bark petition in the 1960s, also the Barunga statement in the 80s. There's artwork that goes along with the aspirational proposals that we make. And in this artwork here, you can see the songlines, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Anagu people, actually in Central Australia. They show the songlines that intersect in the middle here where Uluru is. And so here you've got, this is Kunia, the poison snake. And up here you've got the Woma python, you've got Mala, the rock wallaby, and Kupinya, the desert dingo. And so these are ancient stories, or families is the way that it's described in my first book, Finding the Heart of the Nation, that intersect in the middle where Uluru Statement is. And so it's a really special thing, and it's a canvas that's, I took it to Emmanuel Synagogue, I think it was last year, and this canvas is as wide as my arm span and almost as tall as me, and it's a very compelling thing to behold, you know, and the hope is that it would move people.
And what was the significance of the statement? How was that arrived at?
So the dialogues, each of the dialogues, they had accurate records of meetings. So the dialogues around the country were for 3 days each, and they recorded and endorsed what they had determined, their responses to the different options that there are, such as, a symbolic statement of recognition, which was ranked lowest. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people weren't interested in symbolism. They didn't want to invest their emotions and our efforts and our campaign opportunity in in just some symbolic words, which was what was proposed before this process by people like Tony Abbott and John Howard. We said we wanted substantive reform. The strongest support, obviously, was for the voice, and then secondly, for agreement making. And the voice to influence the decisions that are made about us, and to also, that's the pretty obvious thing, I think, that it's to influence decisions, a voice. But probably what's less obvious is that it's also about unity of our own people. And so a voice or a representative body is a way of us determining who our own leaders are, and having those leaders accountable to us, and then having a process to be able to come together and have our debates, and then coherency in the way we go and pursue what we reach consensus on. And so when we think about the huge gaps between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at the moment and since colonisation, that's an important thing to consider, in the lack of coherency, consensus building processes in a large polity. It is, in my view, especially coming from the union movement, understanding the importance of collectivism, structure behind a voice is just extremely important, and it's really missing and sorely missing.
And the statement very clearly calls for First Nation voice to be enshrined in the Constitution. Why is it important for it to be enshrined in the Constitution?
It's about protecting it, firstly. So there's two real pertinent reasons. The first is that every other representative body we've had in the past, every other voice, has been dismissed or destroyed. So
like
destroyed, sorry?
Like ATSIC.
Yeah, like ATSIC, and more recently the Congress of First Peoples, that was defunded. It was set up as a corporation in the vacuum of ATSIC. Unions had a lot to do with helping our people get that going, but it struggled because it couldn't bite the hand that fed it, so it wasn't as effective as it could be. Much like service organisations that are currently doing their best to negotiate closing the gap targets and refreshes, right? The problem with it is that it's been behind closed doors with the hand that feeds them somewhat, because they're service organisations that all rely on funding from government. So we're talking about, doing something different than the Coalition of Peaks, for example, an unapologetic political organisation. So, and then all the way back to the 1920s, the AAPA, Australian Aboriginal Progressive Association, there was a Wharfie that was the president of that, Fred Maynard, and that was intimidated out of being. So, the Protection Board had complete control over our lives and could take our children legally anytime they wanted, intimidated those leaders until it went out of existence. So it's to protect a representative body and make it the rule of the nation. But the second most pertinent thing is that it would then speak with a mandate of the people if it was constitutionally enshrined, in that it would need to pass a referendum, a very difficult thing, Only 8 out of 44 have been successful, but we must have the courage, knowing that first reason. But if a double majority of the Australian people vote yes, then it'll be a voice to be reckoned with. Really, it'll be a voice that'll speak with the mandate of the Australian people.
Yes. Now the second thing you mentioned was the importance of an agreement. One of the things that mentioned in the Statement from the Heart is what's known as a Makarrata and a Makarrata Commission. Can you explain what a Makarrata is, what a Makarrata Commission would do, and why it's important to Indigenous Australians?
Yeah, Makarrata is a Yolngu process. It's a process that exists and has varying names, for for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. But the simplest way to describe it is it's dispute resolution. You know, it's a process of dispute resolution that in our culture, you know, comes with ceremony. You know, it comes with very strong on bringing the truth, you know, in your heart to the conversation with with good faith. You know, I mean, this is language that we understand that, you know, that I'm using as far as dispute resolution goes, but good faith to reach an outcome, you know, an agreement. And in the Makarrata process, Galarrwuy Yunupingu describes it, I've seen him describe it as when the process or the agreement is made about how we reach peace, then the parties are much more, are much closer than they were before, you know, to the point where a person that did wrong by a family would be accepted into that family and loved as part of that family. And so that's what Makarrata means, you know. And when we say Makarrata Commission, Makarrata, the name is used with to indicate the intent to reach a peaceful outcome where we can come together and be as one.
Now, the third part of the statement from the heart talks very forcefully about the importance of truth-telling about Indigenous history, and this is something that I have a particular interest in. Tell us about truth-telling about the history of the interaction particularly between colonial Australia and the Indigenous Australians.
Yeah, I think, Mark, I think truth-telling has been going on for a very long time in this country. So I just start talking about truth-telling. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious why the Uluru Statement called for truth-telling. Truth-telling is important to, to reaching a peaceful agreement on a past where one of the parties has been terribly wronged. That's an important part of dispute resolution. Certainly in all of the dialogues around the country, all of the constitutional dialogues, our people, especially on the first day, strenuously expressed that they want people to accept the truth of what's happened. And so when we talk about truth-telling, though, I get frustrated when some people say truth-telling needs to come first. Truth-telling, has been going on for a long time. I think a majority of Australians know the truth about our past now. Your book, about the Mayur massacre, for example, is a very important piece of truth-telling. But also, there's many history books. There's there's documentary nowadays. There's movies, and we have royal commissions and all these political parliamentary inquiries full of truth-telling. But what's missing is the voice to use the truth to get the outcomes. So when we think about royal commissions, you get all these recommendations for outcomes, backed by all this truth-telling. But the political power, the voice has been missing, and I think that's why the voice was the most desired reform.
So you talk about the political power. Shortly after the statement from the heart, the then Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, came out in a very disappointing way and expressed some real reservations about the statement from the heart. Can you tell us what your feelings are about that reaction and how you felt at the time about it?
Yeah, it was like a slap in the face, really. I mean, even though we saw it coming, I first noticed that had suspected that he was going to dismiss it in the disrespectful way that he did when I was at Garma, on Yolngu land in northeast Arnhem Land for the Garma festival. And we could hear in his language and his not just what he was saying, but his body language, that he was not committed to the things that he actually had said. For example, Dr. Yunupingu at the the leader of the Gumatj people, a very strong clan of the Yolngu people that run the Garma festival on their lands. He invited Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister of Australia, to jump in the canoe with him, so to speak, and start to move together towards what we proposed at Uluru. And so I could feel that he was going to reject it there, sadly. And when he dismissed it, it was really disrespectful. It was done by media leak. It wasn't even by media release initially. It was there was no consultations, not even with his handpicked Indigenous Advisory Council. And he has continued to say that, even now he's not the Prime Minister, he's continuing to say that it's a third chamber to Parliament, which it simply is not. Not only have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders debunked that by saying that's not what we're proposing, but also, former High Court judges and, people from across the political spectrum have just said this is not what they seek. Just read the Referendum Council report. It's an advisory body.
Can you explain what it is that the statement asks for and why that's different to what Malcolm Turnbull was talking about?
Yeah, we would. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would love a third chamber to Parliament. Don't get me wrong. We would love that sort of power, and to I guess explain it in a little bit more of a deeper way for those that haven't got a grasp on the political system. A third chamber is like saying, a right to veto, which is the reason why those that oppose it use it as a scaremongering tactic. It would need to, legislation needs to pass, the lower house and the upper house at the moment. And they're saying, what the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are calling for is a third chamber where, they can block legislation and, withhold supply and all these scary things that they think that they're scaremongering about, where Australians are quite constitutionally conservative, because our system has worked fairly well, over throughout our history. We would love that sort of power, but we know that's not possible, so there's no way that with an obligation to our people, with that opportunity in those dialogues in Uluru, that we were going to call for something that was impossible. And so what we're calling for is simply the right to table advice to the Parliament, so that in a self-determined way, so that it's through a proper process where the grassroots are heard and we're able to put our position through consensus process, and then where the power in it is, because some socially progressive people will say, well, why don't you go for a third chamber? Why don't you go for that power? Why are you only going for advisory, a right to advise the Parliament? But the power isn't in the legal right to force the Parliament to do something. It's in the power of the collective nature of it, as in First Nations coming together and having, positions that we can then go and campaign for. But it's also in the transparency of it, so to the Parliament, not just to the government behind closed doors, like some of the Closing the Gap negotiations, how they're done, but to the Parliament so that, the Australian people can see what is being proposed clearly, and our own people can see what we've proposed, so that they have confidence in their leadership.
So it's a consultative body to express views of the different parts of the Indigenous community on issues that affect that community.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's as simple as it is, but with the power of the Constitution, the power of collectivism,
yes,
and transparency. Yeah.
Now, of course, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken White, is himself an Indigenous man. What's been his approach to the call for a voice for Indigenous Australians in the Constitution?
Yeah, so Ken Wyatt's position has been in line with the party position. And so I guess I'll take this opportunity, Mark, to talk about the flaw or the difficulty in our democracy for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. See, where we were 100% of the population pre-colonisation, we're down to 3%, you know, barely 3% of the nation's population. Less than that 3%, and I've seen it firsthand, as I'll be doing next week during elections. We've got the Northern Territory election here later this month. But I've travelled around the vast seat of Lingiari, named after Vincent Lingiari, of the Gurindji people in the Wave Hill Walk-Off, and followed the ballot box around. And a lot of our people struggle to make it to the ballot box because of poverty, you know, or because of remote living, or just surviving and doing what we do, going out on country. And so we are less than 3% of the population engaged in our democracy. And therefore, we don't genuinely or effectively choose the representatives in Parliament, which causes them to be indifferent to us. You know, they're not moved by our needs, and the Australian people aren't moved by our needs because there's a whole lot else that people think about when they go to the ballot box that are not Indigenous, right? And a lot have never even met an Indigenous person. Yet this Parliament that doesn't represent us or isn't moved by our needs has the race power in the Constitution. Section 51(26), special laws can be made about Indigenous peoples. That head of power has only been used for us and detrimentally about us at times. And so, you know, this is a real problem with our democracy. And so, therefore, you know, we need this enhanced voice. So this problem in the population, going back to Ken Wyatt, is, and some people say, well, why don't you just get, you know, you already got equality, you've got a right to vote. Why don't you just get, you know, elected, get your people elected to Parliament? The problem is that, you know, all of our representatives at the moment are in a political party, not independents. They represent not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, they represent the Blues, the Reds, or the Greens, right?
Yes.
And they don't represent black people. They don't represent Indigenous people. So, you know, we've got that same problem as the population inside these parties, just outnumbered. You know, you haven't got influence, the numbers are against you. And so this constitutional change is so important.
Yes, yes. Now, Thomas, after the convention at Uluru, you spent something like 18 months travelling amazing distances. I think it was something like, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 26,000 kilometres you travelled?
No.
No? How much was it?
That's funny because something got mixed up there. I wrote an
I thought it'd be
article.
hard to do that much.
Yeah. No, it was much more than 26,000 kilometres when you think about it. You know, like I was driving and flying, mostly flying all over the place. So,
Oh,
you
wow.
know, the journey with the Uluru Statement was you know, 26,000 Ks is nothing. But where that confusion comes in is I wrote an essay. It hasn't been published yet, actually, but it won the Donald Horne. It got a high commendation for the Donald Horne Prize. I came in second, and they gave it a special commendation. But in that and in an article that I contributed to about this flaw in our democracy, in that travelling around during the in the lead up to the election, it was 26,000 Ks.
I see.
Yeah.
And you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you physically carried with you the original Statement from the Heart document. How did that feel? I mean, what a terrible responsibility, because that's a document that in the future will probably be viewed as one of the defining documents of our nation.
Yeah, it was very scary, Mark. I'll tell you what, it was a very stressful time. For around 18 months, I carried it around the country, and I would check it into the oversized baggage and have, you know, separation anxiety until it came out of the, you know, I was waiting for it to come out. And, you know, I don't know if you've ever travelled with oversized baggage, but sometimes it doesn't come out through the oversized baggage thing. Yes. You know, it's hit and miss whether it comes out through oversized or it comes out on the normal carousel. And so, you know, it's just stressful every time, you know, I'm waiting for it. And I left it in a hotel lobby once.
Why were you travelling such distances, and what were you doing with the document?
Oh, I had the great privilege of being entrusted with the Uluru Statement, firstly, by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and leaders in the campaign. But secondly, I had a unique opportunity or privilege at that time in the campaign because I had the resources to do it. So straight after Uluru, as we talked about, it was dismissed by the government, really, and we had no resources for a campaign. So my union, the Maritime Union of Australia, Arnie Pat Anderson, if anyone knows of Arnie Pat, she's a very strong matriarch of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights movement. Her and Professor Megan Davis and Noel Pearson approached Paddy Crumlin, our National Secretary, and said, can you lend Thomas to us to support us? And the MUA didn't hesitate. And, you know, my travel and accommodation for all that time was covered. And so I was able to take it to the people. And I'd seen this beautiful artwork, you know, the canvas at Garma, that time that I was talking about. That was where it was first shown in public after it was, you know, it took a while to paint and everything. And
what did you do with it? Who did you speak to?
Oh, so Marcia Langton was there at the festival actually, and she'd just run a panel with the Uluru Statement, and I suggested to her, I said, I'm going to Gurindji country to visit my friends there. You know, the ancestors of the Wave Hill Walk-Off people, and some of those elders are still alive actually. And so I suggested that I take the statement there, and that, you know, that I start to travel with it. And she said that's a good idea. So, you know, did the consultations and got the permissions, and off I went. Yeah.
And was it mainly to speak to Indigenous people or to speak to Europeans, or what was the purpose?
No, it was everyone and anyone and everyone really, that I could. You see, the reason I thought it would be a good idea to travel with this thing was that it was so compelling to look at, you know, and also because I felt at that time that Turnbull was in this, you know, he was going to dismiss it. There was this political inertia sort of, you know, and even amongst our own people, you know, we struggle like any large polity without any structure. You know, there's always this tension and, you know, and difficulty of moving forward together. So with all of that happening, I thought, well, here's something I can do, you know, and so, you know, got the permission. I wanted to take it to Aboriginal communities first, and, you know, the Gurindji, it was the anniversary of the Wave Hill Walk-Off, so there first, and then to the Pilbara and to the Kimberleys. But then it was just whoever, you know, it just sort of organically grew from there. I'd talk to some people and they'd say, hey, we heard about this, can you bring it, you know, and even, you know, it was a scary thing to carry this thing around and look after it. And it was also a great responsibility to use it as well, because it was such a powerful campaign tool. So I never rested, you know. If I was always away from home in Darwin here, and I would never leave it sitting in my room. I would cold call an office or whatever and just say, I've got half an hour, I'll drop in and tell you about this, you know, and just talk to as many people as I could.
What sort of a reception did you get?
It was a positive reception everywhere I went. You know, it was just, people could be hostile to it to begin with. But when you explain, you know, as we went through the, you know, the reforms and, you know, I addressed a couple of the objections that we face earlier. When you explain the importance of it, you know, that it's not so radical that it changes our whole system, you know, and gives us a right to veto, yet, you know, it's powerful enough to make change for our people and, you know, and establish the structures to take things forward. You know, this balance, I think, is there. And when, you know, when you get this sort of response across the country, and today we see, you know, such great support from across the political spectrum, I describe it as having the ingredients for change. You know, we've got the ingredients. The only things that is lacking is political leadership in Canberra, really.
And you've written a book about your travels with the document, and
Yeah,
one of the things that you talk about is that you feel that average Australians have changed in recent years, and they are much more willing to accept the sort of changes that are called for in the Statement from the Heart, and that it's the political elite that aren't that haven't been convinced in the same way. Can you explain that and why you think it's the case?
yeah. I think it's because the politicians are just so comfortable. You know, they're not. Again, it's a matter of numbers. They're not moved by what 3% of the population determined, even through such a wonderful consensus as that one at Uluru, which is why you know, the Uluru Statement is not written to the Parliament this time, like previous petitions have been. It's not written to a king or the queen, you know, because we know that they fail us every time. And so it's an invitation to the Australian people this time. And we think the only way to move the politicians to support this, which is vital, we can't do it without them because they're the gatekeepers to referendum. You know, a referendum bill needs to be passed, and their leadership is very important. But the only way to move them is to make them uncomfortable. And that's why we need enough people to be noisy enough about this to shift them. And we've been successful, Mark, you know, like, I mean, you've got to consider, you know, you've got to celebrate your wins, we say in the union movement, as small as they may be sometimes.
Yes.
But we had complete dismissal in October 2017 to the federal election in 2018. I think it was, 2018 now. Yeah, so a shift in policy from the coalition government to support it again. You know,
Yes.
since they've been elected, they've walked away again. Not right away from it. There's still opportunity there, but we've got to keep putting the pressure on.
Yes. And Thomas, I mentioned that you've written a book about your travels. You've also written a version for children, for young Australians.
Yeah.
And you've been to schools and talked about the Statement from the Heart and what you've done. And I think recently you, in fact, went to the Emmanuel School in Sydney and spoke to the students there about what you've been doing. What sort of a reception did you get at the school?
You know, this is the other part of answering your question just before. But, you know, like, there's just so much hope in the next generation, right? They are learning Indigenous culture like we never learnt, you know, certainly even in my time in childhood, you know, we never learnt this stuff at school. So the kids give us so much hope. The Emmanuel school kids, you know, they lapped it up. You know, they just, you know, I felt like a celebrity, you know, because obviously the Emmanuel families had talked about my presentation to the Emmanuel Synagogue. And so, you know, it was great. But it's the same reception everywhere in the schools. The children love Indigenous culture. You know, it's something they're proud of, as in this is from the place that we come from. And this is something that's ours, you know, if you know, and if only the adults will listen. The inspiration for this book, this one here, Finding Our Heart, was that experience, you know, that, well, my kids come home from school and tell me about Larrakia seasons and language and stuff, because we're Torres Strait Islanders, this isn't our country. And so they love to talk about it, and we read progressive books to our kids. So I thought, you know, I've got to create this tool for the kids to teach their parents, you know, not so much for the parents to teach their kids.
Yes.
Another great experience, Mark, I'll share with you quickly. Sorry, mate. Sorry, I ramble on a bit, but
No, that's fine.
was at Fremantle College, and it was to 15-year-olds and younger. There was a number of assemblies set up so I could do one after the other to teach the kids at this college about the Uluru Statement. And this 15-year-old boy, afterwards, in between sessions, who'd been in the first session, he shyly came up to me and he said, you know, I loved what you told us about. You know, it's inspirational. And he said, I just want to tell you something. He said, my family, I hear them say racist things. And he said, I'm going to be different. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be different. And he's 15. And by the time we have a referendum, it could be in 3 years. It won't be this term of Parliament. But he could be voting, you know. And
Yes.
it's one of the things that gives me hope.
So the Youth of Australia gives you real hope for achieving your aims at some stage in the not too distant future.
Yeah. And this is the other book here, Finding the Heart of the Nation. So Awarfi has written a couple of books. You know, never thought I'd do that.
Yeah.
You know, Militant MUA official. Yeah, author now.
You've done amazingly well.
Thanks, mate.
Tell me, Thomas, are there other countries where First Nations have a voice of a kind that you're calling for?
Yeah, there's similar. You know, not exactly the same as what we're calling for, but my understanding, learning from people like Professor Megan Davis and reading, you know, a bit is there's the Sami Parliament in Norwegian countries, you know, in Scandinavian countries. Sorry, they have a voice, you know, in that sense, a parliament. It doesn't have the right to veto either. They only give advisory, advice, but they have something similar. And there's structures that exist where there's treaties as well, you know, because of that long history of having some power compared to us, you know, through historical treaties.
Yes. As the Jewish people have had to deal with racism for millennia, what can Jewish communities do to assist your task in achieving the aims of the Statement from the Heart?
You can do what you believe in, you know, and if you believe in the things that I've talked about and what the Uluru Statement proposes, and I'm sure you do, then you should take initiative to map out your, you know, mapping is, something we talk about in the union movement. I'm sure it's not, you know, to plan and map your circles of influence, you know, so your broader circles of influence through your businesses or your committees, through your synagogues, through your sporting influence, you know, in sporting clubs and all of that, your kids in your schools, and teach people about the Uluru Statement firstly. Our campaign research shows us that there is 56% of people, and this is good numbers, 56% of the Australian people would vote yes today to enshrine a First Nations voice. It's good numbers because, firstly, because there hasn't been a well-resourced campaign to date. And, you know, it's just been sort of like doing the best that we can with what we've got. There hasn't been political leadership. But it's also good numbers because it correlates with the amount of people that our research shows know about the Uluru Statement. So simply teaching people about the Uluru Statement will grow our movement because our research indicates that when people learn about it, they support it. So that's a really important thing to do. Secondly, the decision makers, the key decision makers, as I said, the gatekeepers of referendum are politicians. You know, it is the government. So if you're involved in a political party, drive them mad, you know, with constantly advocating and finding imaginative ways to keep it in their face, you know, the Uluru Statement. If you are involved in a business or something that lobbies, you know, then do that as well. Always remind them that the Uluru Statement is something that your constituents believe in. It's very important. Put pressure on them. Make them uncomfortable.
And where is the original document now?
It's at the UNSW with Professor Megan Davis. She looks after it nowadays. And our great hope is that when we achieve this, everything that the Uluru Statement calls for, it will go back to the community where it was made, and that's the Mutijulu community. Right in the shadow of the rock in the late evening. It is that little community. It's I think it should go back there.
Right. Now, I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions that participants want to ask you. So what I'd like to do now is to hand it over to Eve Reid, who's a member of Jews for Social Action, for her to moderate the questions.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the interview, mate. Oh yeah, I forgot
Eve,
to add.
are you there?
While we're waiting for Eve, I forgot to add. I'm actually. I told people at Emmanuel, but I've got Jewish descent somewhat.
Thank you.
My grandfather. My grandfather was a Polish refugee. Refugee, and yeah, I think he was estranged from the Jewish faith, as in I think his mother married outside of the faith and that. But yeah.
Well, that gives us a real connection. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thomas, there are a few questions, some of which you've already answered. So someone asked, what can we do to support the Uluru Statement? I think you've answered that. Do you have any ideas for teaching about the statement to primary school children?
Yeah, so I can add to the first question as well, in that there are a couple of websites that people can use. There's campaigning tools on those websites that might come in handy. The websites are www.ulurustatement.org. So that's one part of the a campaign for the Uluru Statement. There's the other one is www.fromtheheart.com.au. Both led by Indigenous leaders, and both are coordinating with each other. It's just in the nature of big campaigns, you get people do their own thing to support for the same thing. So hopefully you can find some things that will help you there. For kids, I've seen some brilliant stuff, methods that teachers have used to teach their kids about it. Simply drawing Uluru and learning about the word Makarrata, and the meaning of those things that Makarrata seeks to do. All sorts of things. Just reading the Uluru Statement or my book. I think is a really useful tool for teaching kids in primary schools. They're important, for helping kids learn.
This is a comment. Thomas, you are a very impressive representative of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders. I wish you all the best, and we will do what we can to help.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
There was recently some information in the media about agreements reached between Scott Morrison, Ken Wyatt, and another Indigenous woman who celebrated some changes or progress. What was that about, and does it have anything to do with the statement from the heart, or from the heart's aims and hopes?
Yeah, that's Arnie Pat Turner, the leader of the peak of coalition of peak bodies that work on health or housing and those sorts of services. I touched on it earlier. Arnie Pat Turner is a massive supporter of the Uluru Statement, and she's been quite strong publicly on that. But it's also understood that those service organisations being affected by their sensitivity to government funding, they're not. That's not the voice that we're talking about. So it's something that we're talking about, a political organisation that is able to unapologetically represent Indigenous peoples. The peaks, those service organisations obviously still have a very important role to play once the voice is established. Experts and specialists in those areas. And so with that announcement, as an Indigenous person, as I'm sure anybody that wants change would be disappointed with the lack of ambition in the actual outcomes. And I'm sure our people, that negotiated that had a lot more ambition. But without the power to negotiate better, and I'm sure they did their absolute best. A target of, parity by, I think it was 2060, these sorts of things for incarceration rates just aren't ambitious enough. No further funding into the programs and that seek to close these gaps, is just a real disappointment. So we do need to do better in our advocacy.
Thomas, someone's asking, can you talk a little about treaty?
Yeah, certainly. Treaty or agreement making was the second most desired reform in the constitutional dialogues. And we didn't use Uluru just to say, we want treaty now, sort of thing. We used the opportunity at Uluru to establish ways of gaining meaningful treaties. So firstly, the Makarrata Commission, about supervising agreement making. The commission, I think of it this way, as a unionist, if you know of the, whether you're a unionist or not, the Fair Work Commission. The Fair Work Commission is a place for, where parties reach an impasse in negotiations, workers and employers. There's conciliation options through that commission and all those sorts of things. So, a treaty needs that sort of thing to help keep things on track, especially where one party is far more powerful than the other. Okay, so treaties are happening right now, and that's another reason we didn't just call for treaty. They've been negotiated in Victoria for over 4 years now. Not negotiated, sorry. It's been a process of establishing the means to negotiate. Treaties are very, very complex for us as a colonized people for around 250 years now. Okay, so when you think about treaties in other nations, they were done at around the time of colonization, and therefore were somewhat of a tool of the colonizer to legitimize their claim, I suppose, over that country against other colonizers. Our treaty comes after much of our structures, and our culture has been destroyed. And so, treaty is a very complex thing for us in a contemporary sense. Treaty is just agreement making, right? It's just an agreement. Much more important though, given that it's a settlement, considered as a settlement between, the settler colony and First Nations. I'll go back to power. We're so terribly divided, our people, because of the impacts of 250 years, but also because of the way that native title has been quite divisive in the way that John Howard, watered it down and that. So we don't have a lot of power as First Nations in a negotiation against a state, because it's between the First Nations and states at the moment, that have long established structures, have expertise in negotiation. They do it all the time, and have somewhat unlimited resources compared to this divided, First Nation, with no structure. So we are also, sorry, lastly on this, and I might not be very coherent in the way I'm describing this, but if the treaties are between states and First Nations in a federal system, it's like us negotiating an agreement with a supervisor in a workplace instead of the boss that has all the power, you know what I mean? The state can only deliver so much to the First Nations that they're negotiating with. Secondly, the outcomes or whatever the state legislates can be undermined by federal legislation, which, all legislation must be consistent with. Worse in the territories, like the Northern Territory here, where I think a treaty will be not worth the paper it's written on without the Commonwealth's or the federal government's full agreement, because of the territory power in the Constitution. They can override anything we do here. I hope that describes treaty in a way, I'll come to the point, in a way that I think that the most important thing to treaty is establishing the constitutionally enshrined voice. so that we are able to negotiate the federal government's obligations to treaty. So that's what I say about treaty. It's just an agreement. There's a terrible power imbalance, and we need the voice as a priority.
Thanks. There's another question. If the Labor Party was elected, do you think the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representative would represent and advocate for the statement?
I think that's, well, I know that's their party platform at the moment. It has been since late 2018, official party platform, the conference in December 2018. And they've consistently supported the Uluru Statement being delivered in full. They haven't wavered from that, and I've got to give them credit for that. They need to be kept to that. So I hope that if there are any members of the Labor Party that are listening, you know, that are participating today, please raise it at your branch meetings, raise it at state conferences, that we must stick to that, and that we must continue to put pressure on the coalition for bipartisanship on this. So, you know, while they support it, they need to be kept in line, you know, as politicians need. You know, we need to keep reminding them they should support it. If, do I think they will when they get into power? I only think they will if we put the pressure on them. Again, you know, comfortable politicians don't tend to do difficult things, and this is a difficult thing. So it will be yet to be seen. Depends on our activism.
There aren't any other questions at the moment, so I will hand over to Julia for concluding remarks.
Okay.
Thank you. It's pouring with rain here, so I hope my sound hasn't got very strange. What a fantastic session. Thank you so much, Thomas, and also Mark. Speaking for myself, I learned such a lot. Fascinating to hear and get an understanding of how the Uluru Statement fits in with the Parliament, and to hear your comments and your sort of sensible comments once you think of obvious comments once you realise it about having Indigenous members of Parliament versus the Uluru Statement and the involvement of the group and the 3%. I thought that was well, that opened my eyes. And the other thing that was very positive and encouraging was your comment about young people and how much more they know about Indigenous issues and where they're coming from. Because when I think of my own education, which was somewhat a long time ago, particularly in primary school, but also in secondary school, we learned very little, and what we did learn was stereotypes. And now I realise how ridiculous it all was. So It was very fascinating. So thank you so much. Thank you also to Eve Reid, to Vicky Israel and David Roberts for helping put this together. Now, Thomas and also Mark, we would normally give you a gift, probably a coffee cup that you didn't need, an NSTE coffee cup, or a recipe book that you might think was very nice but you might never use. So in these COVID days, and I hope this is viewable, instead we are giving you what is called a pocket blessing. So there's two little scrolls here. I have opened one. And this one says, I hope it's got the right, yes, blessed are you in your comings. And the other one says, blessed are you in your goings. So that is for you and also you, Mark. From us with all our heart, thank you so much for giving your time, but also your experience, your knowledge. It has been just quite illuminating and fascinating. And I'm sure we'll stimulate a lot of discussion around the tables of the people listening to us tonight, or with us tonight, where it is almost dinner time. So there will be discussions around the table where it's not quite so late for you up there in beautiful, warm Darwin.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Eve, and thanks, David. And Mark, it was an honour to be interviewed by you, mate. Thank you. Love your work.
Thank you very much. It's been a great honour for me.
Thank you. Just a quick word before we go. I just mentioned Jews for Social Action, just in case anyone is wondering who is this group. we take the opportunity to embody what the Jewish community calls tikkun olam, or repairing the world. And we tend to do hands-on type projects as well as talks and education such as today. You can find out more on the NSTE website, nste.org.au, or you can email us at jsa@nste.org.au. We as a group, we meet now through Zoom once a month. Hopefully one day we will meet again face to face in our regular meetings. But I just want to thank you again, Thomas. Thank you, Mark. Hope everybody keeps safe and well. You Melbourne people, Victorians, we are particularly thinking of you and hope you're all okay. And thank you, everybody, and good night, good evening in Darwin.
Good night,
See you
everybody.
later. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Go
Good
on.
night.
Bye.